favorite.
25 shocking things that were normal in the Wild West. Imagine stepping back into the Wild West, where life was as unpredictable as a roll of dice in a dusty saloon. We all know the stories of cowboys, outlaws, and gold rush fever.
Don't let bold talk for a one-eyed fat man.
But what if I told you that the reality was even crazier than the legends? Number 25. Diverse populations. When we think about the Wild West, the image that often comes to mind is that of rugged white cowboys taming the frontier. But believe it or not, the reality was far more diverse than Hollywood would have us believe. After the Civil War, the completion of the railroads opened up the West to a flood of people from various backgrounds, all seeking new opportunities and a better life. You had African Americans moving west in significant numbers. Many were freed slaves looking for a fresh start and better living conditions. They found tight-knit communities and became an integral part of the social fabric. Then there were the Chinese immigrants, primarily brought in to work on the railroads. Once the tracks were laid, many stayed, contributing to the local economies in numerous ways, from laundry services to running businesses. European immigrants also poured in, bringing with them their unique cultures and traditions. Germans, Slovaks, Finns, Norwegians, and many others settled in the West, adding to the rich tapestry of life there. Hollywood's portrayal of the Wild West as a land of predominantly white heroes fighting other white outlaws couldn't be further from the truth. In reality, it was a melting pot of cultures and ethnicities, each contributing to the vibrant and often tumultuous life on the frontier. Number 24. Chinese doctors. Chinese doctors were a common and highly respected presence in the Wild West. This might surprise you, given the prevalent racism of the time, but necessity often trumps prejudice. While Western doctors were often seen as charlatans selling snake oil and other dubious remedies, Chinese doctors brought with them a wealth of knowledge from thousands of years of medical tradition. People from all walks of life, including Caucasians, frequently sought out Chinese medical practitioners. The reason was simple: they were effective. Chinese medicine offered treatments from a variety of ailments that Western medicine of the time simply couldn't handle. It's interesting to note how, despite the widespread racism, the efficacy of Chinese medical practices earned them a place of respect in many communities. Number 23. AfricanAmerican Cowboys. One of the most overlooked facts about the Wild West is the significant presence of African-American cowboys. That's right, not all cowboys were white, and many of the best ones were African Americans. Following the Civil War, there were numerous opportunities for freed slaves to work as cowhands, especially in Texas. They took up these roles with skill and determination, becoming an essential part of the cowboy culture we often romanticize today. One of the most notable figures was Bass Reeves, an African American who became one of the first black U.S. deputy marshals west of the Mississippi River. His achievements are legendary. Over his 30-year career, Reeves arrested more than 3,000 criminals, showcasing exceptional bravery and skill. It's a shame that figures like Reeves are often overshadowed in popular culture, which tends to focus on the white cowboy narrative. So, the next time you watch a Western, remember that the reality was far more diverse and inclusive than Hollywood typically depicts. The Wild West was a place where people of different backgrounds came together, worked hard, and shaped the history of the American frontier in ways that are both surprising and inspiring. Number 22. Near extermination of bison. The arrival of settlers and farmers on the Great Plains had a profound and devastating impact on the American bison, a creature that once roamed these lands in the millions. As farmers moved west, they plowed up the vast grasslands to grow wheat and other crops, destroying the natural habitat of these magnificent animals. But it wasn't just habitat loss that led to their near extinction. There was also a concerted effort by the U.S. government to deplete bison populations in order to undermine the Native American tribes that depended on them for food, clothing, and materials. This strategy was brutally effective. Bison were slaughtered in staggering numbers. By the late 1800s, their population had plummeted from an estimated 30 to 60 million to just a few hundred bison. This decimation of bison herds not only marked a tragic loss of wildlife, but also dealt a devastating blow to the Native American way of life, further compounding their hardships during this period of intense upheaval. Number 21. Native American Genocide. The story of the Native American Genocide is a harrowing chapter in American history, marked by systemic destruction and displacement. When Europeans first arrived in North America, there were between 5 and 15 million Native people living across the continent. However, by the end of the Indian Wars in the late 1800s, this number had dwindled to a mere 238,000. The U.S. government authorized over 1,500 military engagements against the Native American tribes, more than any other country has conducted against its indigenous people. The motives were clear: to clear the land for European settlers who were eager to exploit the abundant resources. This era saw countless atrocities, from forced relocations like the infamous Trail of Tears to outright massacres. The systemic genocide wasn't only physical, but also cultural. Policies aimed at eradicating Native American languages, religions, and social structures were implemented through institutions like Indian boarding schools. These efforts sought to assimilate Native children into Euro-American culture forcibly, further eroding their cultural heritage. The culmination effect of these actions was a tragic and profound loss of life, culture, and autonomy for Native American communities. Number 20. The role of the railroad. The advent of the railroad was a transformative force in the American West, reshaping commerce and settlement patterns in ways previously unimaginable. Before the railroads, transporting goods and people across the vast expanses of the West was a daunting and time-consuming task. But with the completion of the Transcontinental Railroad, everything changed. The railroads made it possible to move cattle and other goods quickly and efficiently to markets that were previously out of reach. This was particularly significant for the cattle industry. Ranchers could now transport their livestock to slaughterhouses and markets in the East much faster and more cost-effective than driving them overland. This revolutionized the cattle business and turned towns like Dodge City into bustling hubs of economic activity. Beyond commerce, the railroads spurred the growth of new towns and cities along their routes, attracting settlers and businesses. These burgeoning communities thrived on the opportunities provided by the rail connections, leading to rapid development and expansion of the western frontier. The railroads didn't just connect distant places, they brought people together and resources, laying the groundwork for the modern United States. The iron rails forged a pathway for progress, forever changing the landscape and the lives of those who ventured into the Wild West. Number 19. Prostitution and exploitation. Prostitution was rampant, driven by the economic hardships and limited opportunities available to women. Many of these women were forced into the trade due to a lack of available alternatives. The brothels where they worked were often grim places, characterized by violence, drug abuse, and a constant struggle for survival. Societal attitudes towards prostitutes were harsh and unforgiving. Local newspapers would frequently name and shame these women, further marginalizing them and pushing them deeper into a cycle of exploitation and despair. Anne Butler, in her book Daughters of Joy, Sisters of Misery, describes how the sensationalist and often cruel reporting by newspapers exacerbated the already dire conditions these women faced. The brothels themselves were exploitive environments where women and girls were kept in a constant state of competition for the meager food and resources available. Annie P.R., a contemporary observer, noted that these establishments operated on a system of manipulation and control, leaving the women with little hope for a better life. Prostitution in the Wild West was not a glamorous or liberating occupation. It was a brutal existence marked by exploitation and suffering. Number 18. Use of camels. One of the more surprising and lesser-known chapters of the Wild West involves the use of camels by the U.S. government. In 1855, Congress allocated $30,000 to purchase camels from Egypt, hoping that these hardy animals would be better suited for the long, arduous journeys across the arid Southwest than horses. The idea was that camels, known for their endurance and ability to go long periods without water, would make excellent pack animals for military and transportation purposes. By the time the Civil War began in 1861, the Army had imported around 70 camels. They adapted surprisingly well to the environment and started breeding, leading to sightings of wild camels in Texas and other parts of the Southwest for many years. The last reported sighting of these wild camels was in 1941. The legacy of these camels is a quirky footnote in the history of the Wild West, illustrating the experimental and often desperate measures taken during the period of westward expansion. While the camel experiment was ultimately deemed a failure, it remains a fascinating example of the innovative and sometimes outlandish efforts to conquer the challenging landscapes of the American frontier. Number 17. Widespread homosexuality. When you think of cowboys, the image that comes to mind is usually one of rugged masculinity and heterosexual bravado. However, the reality of life on the frontier included a significant presence of same-sex relationships, which were relatively accepted due to the harsh and isolated conditions of cowboy life. In the early days of the West, there was a surprising level of tolerance for these relationships, primarily because the grueling and solitary work on the ranches and cattle drives didn't allow for much discrimination. One fascinating historical anecdote is the story of Charlie Parkhurst. Known as one of the best stagecoach drivers in the Wild West, Parkhurst was also famous for his drinking and shooting skills. What many people didn't know, however, was that Charlie was actually Charlotte Darky Parkhurst, a woman who spent much of her adult life living as a man. Her story came to light only after her death, sparking widespread curiosity and interest. Some historians even suggest that Parkhurst was one of the first women to vote in a presidential election, decades before the 19th Amendment was passed in 1920. Patricia Nell Warren, a historian and author, has noted that the early West's economic conditions made it difficult for landlords and employers to be choosy about who they hired, which contributed to a more accepting environment for same-sex relationships. Number 16. The peculiar Pony Express. Despite its short lifespan, the Pony Express left a lasting legacy. Imagine this, a relay system of brave riders dashing day and night across almost 1,900 miles from St. Joseph, Missouri, to Sacramento, California. They switched horses every 10 to 15 miles at various stations to keep up a relentless pace. This slashed the delivery time from a cumbersome 24 days to just 10. The riders themselves were a hardy bunch, often young men who relished the thrill and danger of the job. They braved harsh weather, treacherous terrain, and the constant threat of attacks by bandits or hostile Native American tribes. The Pony Express was a lifeline for communication during its brief existence, but it was ultimately a victim of technological advancement. When the telegraph came along, offering instant communication over long distances, the Pony Express quickly became obsolete. The telegraph was faster, more reliable, and less risky, effectively ending the need for the arduous rides of the Pony Express. Number 15. Terror and violence. If there's one thing that truly characterized the Wild West, it was the rampant violence and crime. Places like Dodge City, Kansas, became infamous for their lawlessness. Between 1876 and 1885, Dodge City earned its reputation with a staggering murder rate of 165 per 100,000 people. To put that in perspective, living there meant you had a 1 in 61 chance of being murdered. It was a place where life was cheap, and disputes were often settled with bullets rather than words. Infamous outlaws roamed the West, with Jesse James being one of the most notorious. James and his gang carried out bank and train robberies, becoming legends in their own time. Despite his criminal activities, some viewed Jesse James as a folk hero, a Robin Hood-like figure. He was so notorious that after his death, he was buried in his farm's front yard to prevent grave robbers from desecrating his body. The violence and terror of the Wild West were not just the stuff of legend, but a brutal reality for those who lived through it. Number 14. Normalized alcohol consumption. Alcohol played a central role in the daily life of the Wild West. Saloons were more than just places to get a drink. They were the social hubs of the frontier towns. These establishments were where people gathered to unwind, share news, and escape the harsh realities of their lives.
You're under
The high levels of alcohol consumption were a reflection of the times. Life was tough, and many turned to drink as a way to cope with the stresses and uncertainties of frontier living. Saloons were often the busiest places in town, frequented by everyone from cowboys to miners to lawmen. They weren't just bars. They were multifunctional spaces where business deals were made, elections were discussed, and sometimes even trials were held. The atmosphere was typically rowdy, with card games, music, and often fights breaking out.
You talking to me, Marshal? Your name's Reno, isn't it?
Look, Marshal, I don't know what kind of town you're running here.
This isn't my town.
Well, I wouldn't know. See, I just rode in.
Number 13. Vigilante Justice. The Wild West was a place where traditional law enforcement often couldn't keep up with the rapid expansion and rampant lawlessness. This gap in law and order led to the rise of vigilante justice. Imagine living in a town where the sheriff was either too overwhelmed or too far away to deal with every crime. These vigilantes weren't always motivated by a sense of righteousness. Sometimes their actions were driven by personal vendettas or mob mentality. Lynchings became a grim hallmark of frontier justice. One of the most infamous examples was the hanging of Tom Horn, a hired gunman and detective, in 1903. Another notorious case involved the Montana Vigilantes in the 1860s. They were a group that formed to combat rampant crime in the absence of effective law enforcement. They executed numerous suspected criminals, often without a fair trial. Number 12. Child labor. In the Wild West, child labor was an unfortunate reality. With families struggling to survive in harsh conditions, every able-bodied person, regardless of age, was expected to contribute. Children worked long hours in various industries, including mining, agriculture, and even as cowhands. In mining towns, young boys often worked as breaker boys, separating coal from slate in dangerous and unhealthy conditions. The work was back-breaking and perilous, with little regard for safety. Accidents were common, and the physical toll on these young workers was immense. Agricultural work was equally grueling. Children as young as 8 or 9 worked in the fields, planting, weeding, and harvesting crops from dawn till dusk. The long hours and harsh conditions left little time for education or play, and many children suffered from exhaustion and injuries. These harsh conditions meant that many children did not have the opportunity to attend school regularly, perpetuating a cycle of poverty and lack of opportunity. Number 11. Lack of medical knowledge. Medical practices in the Wild West were often rudimentary at best. With few trained doctors and even fewer medical facilities, settlers relied heavily on home remedies and folk medicine to treat their ailments. Common diseases included tuberculosis, cholera, and smallpox, all of which could be devastating in isolated frontier communities. Medical knowledge was limited, and many treatments were based on more superstition than science. For instance, it was not uncommon to treat a fever by bleeding a patient, a practice believed to balance the body's humors, but which often weakened the patient further. Herbal remedies were widely used, with varying degrees of effectiveness. For example, willow bark, which contains salicin, a precursor to aspirin, was used to reduce fevers and pain. Snake oil salesmen were notorious in the West, peddling patent medicines that promised cures for everything from rheumatism to baldness. These concoctions were often ineffective and sometimes dangerous, containing high levels of alcohol or opium. Childbirth was another area fraught with danger. Without access to proper medical care, many women and infants died during or shortly after delivery. Number 10. Gold Rush Fever. When we talk about Gold Rush Fever, it's hard not to get caught up in the excitement that gripped thousands of people during the mid-1800s. The promise of striking it rich drew people from all over the world to places like California and later Alaska. Imagine the thrill of hearing that gold had been discovered. It was like hitting the jackpot. This rush for wealth sparked massive migrations and settlements, transforming sleepy towns into bustling cities almost overnight. But it wasn't all glitter and gold. The reality for most prospectors was harsh and unforgiving. They faced grueling physical labor, often in dangerous and unhealthy conditions. Mining camps were rough places, with makeshift shelters and minimal amenities. Disease, malnutrition, and accidents were common. Prospectors spent long days panning for gold or digging in the mines, usually with very little to show for their efforts. It was a tough, gritty existence, far from the dream of easy riches that lured them west. Number 9. Mail-order brides. The phenomenon of mail-order brides is one of those fascinating aspects of frontier life that shows just how determined people were to build their lives and families in the Wild West. With so many men heading west to seek their fortunes, there was a significant gender imbalance. To address this, lonely bachelors placed ads in newspapers, seeking brides from the East or even overseas. Women who responded to these ads were often looking to escape difficult circumstances or to find better opportunities in the West. These marriages were challenging from the start. Many couples met for the first time at their wedding, having only corresponded through letters. The women had to adapt quickly to the harsh realities of frontier life, which was a far cry from what they were used to. They faced isolation, hard labor, and the daunting task of setting up a home in often primitive conditions. Despite these challenges, many of these marriages worked out, contributing to the growth and stability of frontier communities. Society's views on these marriages were mixed, with some seeing them as a practical solution to the gender imbalance, while others viewed them with skepticism and concern for the women involved. Number 8. Barbed wire and range wars. The invention of barbed wire in the 1870s was a game-changer for the American West. Before its invention, open-range cattle ranching was the norm, with vast tracts of land unfenced and shared by multiple ranchers. Barbed wire allowed landowners to fence off their property cheaply and effectively, which helped protect their crops and cattle from straying. However, this led to significant land disputes and the infamous range wars. One of the most famous was the Johnson County War in Wyoming in the early 1890s. Wealthy cattle barons used barbed wire to fence off huge areas of land, often encroaching on the land used by smaller ranchers and homesteaders. Tensions escalated, leading to violent clashes. The range wars highlighted the conflicts between big business interests and the smaller independent settlers, reflecting the broader struggles of the American West as it transitioned from open range to more settled and regulated land use. Number 7. Cattle drives. Cattle drives were an essential part of the cowboy era, playing a crucial role in the economy of the West. Picture this: vast herds of cattle being driven from Texas to railheads in Kansas, where they would be shipped to markets in the East. These drives were epic journeys, often covering hundreds of miles and taking several months to complete. Life on the trail was tough for cowboys. They faced long days in the saddle, extreme weather, and the constant threat of stampedes. Cowboys had to be skilled horsemen and quick thinkers, able to handle the unpredictable nature of the herds and the terrain. Nights spent under the stars, with the cowboys taking turns on night watch to keep the cattle calm and prevent them from wandering off. Despite the hardships, there was a certain romantic allure to the cowboy life. The camaraderie among the men, the sense of freedom, and the connection to the open land made it a unique experience. Cattle drives were not just about moving cattle. They were a rite of passage and a defining element of the cowboy culture that has since become an enduring symbol of the American West. Number 6. Boom towns and ghost towns. The rise and fall of boom towns is a quintessential part of the Wild West story. Imagine a quiet, empty landscape suddenly bursting to life with the discovery of gold, silver, or another valuable resource. People from all over the world would flock to these areas, eager to make their fortunes. Towns would spring up almost overnight, complete with saloons, general stores, and hotels. These boom towns were vibrant, chaotic places where fortunes could be made or lost in the blink of an eye. But just as quickly as they rose, many boom towns fell. Once the resources were exhausted, the townspeople would leave in search of the next big strike. Buildings were abandoned, and these once bustling towns turned into ghost towns. One famous example is Bodie, California. It boomed in the late 1800s with the discovery of gold, but was abandoned by the early 20th century. Today, it is a well-preserved ghost town that offers a glimpse into the fleeting nature of these frontier settlements. Number 5. Buffalo Soldiers. The Buffalo Soldiers were African-American soldiers who played a crucial role in the Indian Wars and other military campaigns of the frontier. Formed after the Civil War, these regiments were tasked with a variety of duties, from building infrastructure to protecting settlers and fighting Native American tribes. The name Buffalo Soldiers was reportedly given to them by the Native Americans, who respected their fierce fighting spirit and resilience. Despite their significant contributions, Buffalo Soldiers faced immense challenges. They often dealt with harsh conditions, inadequate supplies, and rampant racism from both within the military and the civilian population. Nevertheless, they earned a reputation for bravery and effectiveness. Their legacy includes notable figures like Henry O. Flipper, the first African-American graduate of West Point. The Buffalo Soldiers' story is a testament to their perseverance and dedication in the face of adversity. Number 4. Frontier newspapers. In the Wild West, newspapers played a vital role in spreading news and information. They were the lifeline that connected isolated communities, provided updates on everything from local events to national news. Newspapers were often started by enterprising individuals who saw the need for communication in these remote areas. Publications like the Tombstone Epitaph in Arizona and the Rocky Mountain News in Colorado became essential sources of information. Editors of these frontier newspapers were often colorful characters themselves, known for their bold and sometimes sensational reporting. They didn't just report the news, they shaped public opinion and played a part in the political and social dynamics of the time. The role of the newspapers was crucial in keeping communities informed and connected in a vast and often lawless frontier. Number 3, gambling and vice.
Naked, but I guess with everyone similarly disadvantaged, there's scant chance of misadventure.
I'm out.
Gambling and other vices was rampant in the Wild West, contributing to its reputation as a rough and rowdy place.
Well, this is well timed. You gentlemen mind if I take his spot?
If and you play his hand.
Saloons and gambling halls were ubiquitous, offering card games, roulette, and various forms of betting. The stakes were often high, and fortunes could be won or lost in a single night. These establishments were not just centers of entertainment, they were social hubs where people gathered to relax, socialize, and conduct business. The prevalence of gambling and vice had a significant impact on frontier society. It brought a certain lawlessness to towns, attracting a mix of adventurers, con artists, and criminals.
I would prefer not to.
It is too late.
While it provided entertainment and excitement,
You have regarded the cards.
You seen him, you play him.
I ain't Annie.
The other hombre hunted.
You seen him, you play him.
And if I don't?
it also led to numerous conflicts and crimes. The environment of easy money and high stakes
You play them cards, Fancy Dan.
contributed to the Wild West notoriety and its enduring mystique.
Then no one compel another man to engage in recreation. Certainly not a son of a gun as ill-humored as yourself. And as for names, my horse is Dan. I'm Buster. Buster Scruggs.
Buster Scruggs.
Number 2, land speculation.
You know, good smelly saloon. My favorite place in the world.
Land speculation played a major role in the settlement patterns of the American West. Speculators bought large tracts of land, often unseen, hoping to sell them at a profit as more settlers moved in. This practice was a double-edged sword. On one hand, it promoted rapid settlement and development. On the other hand, it often led to fraudulent schemes and conflicts over land ownership. Notable speculators like James Rivas, who famously forged documents to claim ownership of millions of acres in Arizona, exemplified the extremes of land speculation. These speculators used various tactics, from bribery to outright fraud, to secure and sell land. While some made fortunes, many settlers found themselves embroiled in legal battles over their claims. Land speculation significantly shaped the development of the West, driving both growth and conflict. Contributed to the Wild West notoriety and its enduring mystique. Number 1. The Rise of Outlaws. The rise of notorious outlaws is one of the most thrilling aspects of the Wild West history. Figures like Billy the Kid, Jesse James, and Butch Cassidy captured the public's imagination with their daring exploits and defiance of authority. These outlaws became legends, partly due to their real-life deeds, and partly due to the sensationalist reporting in dime novels of the time. Billy the Kid, for instance, was involved in numerous shootouts and escaped from jail multiple times before being killed at a young age. Jesse James, a former Confederate guerrilla, became infamous for his bank and train robberies. Despite their criminal activities, these outlaws often garnered a degree of public sympathy, seen as rebels against a corrupt or oppressive system. Their legacies continue to influence popular culture, immortalized in countless books, movies, and TV shows.
Haven't had much need of it yet.
Looks like we got ourselves a bad man right here.
The stories of these outlaws reflect the lawlessness and excitement of the Wild West, contributing to its enduring fascination in American history. So, what are your thoughts on this? Let us know in the comments below.